When my husband and I were expecting our first, we nicknamed them Wee One. And we did the same when we were expecting our second a couple years later. That little one who turned out to be our second son was Wee Two. Lee and I had decided that we did want to have a third, so naturally it flowed that Wee Three would be the nickname for that little one. But unfortunately, things didn't go the way we'd expected. I was only 7.5 weeks along when I had an ultrasound and found out that little one had no heartbeat, wasn't going to be a viable pregnancy. That was in April of 2015 and was the start of a journey that we hadn't expected. So not long after that loss in June, found out we were expecting again. We were very excited, but it was very nerve-wracking. So in September of 2015, I was about 18 weeks along. Towards the end of the month, I came home and I started bleeding. But unfortunately, the bleeding didn't stop. On the day of one of our son's birthday parties, we went to our local hospital to get checked out. I went to the hospital. My mom went with me. Later that day, after some tests and ultrasound, found that I was indeed miscarrying again. That day truly is a touchstone in my life. Because I can honestly say that I've not been the same person since that day. The doctor did prepare me that I would go into labor. When I went home later that night, I did indeed deliver our daughter. She was so little. We didn't know at the time that she was a girl, but she was so little. My mom came back with me to the hospital. The hospital earlier on that day had given me a container, essentially, that they said if I delivered at home, I could bring the baby in, which was horrifying to me. Babies go in blankets, they go in your arms, they don't go in what the hospital called a specimen jar. But that's what we had, and that's what we were told to do, so that's what we did. The experience at the hospital was horrible. It felt very sterile, very surreal, very out of body for me. But I do remember the doctor who came in. I'd asked a question about like, what do we do next, or like what happens, or something along those lines, and he basically said, well, it's a dead baby. Like, it's a dead baby. So I just remember those two words, like dead baby. It's funny how certain words can cut through all that fog and all that chaos there, because those words I've never forgotten. Before we left, I'd asked the nurse, well, what happens to our baby? And she wasn't sure. I was horrified to think, like, where are you going to take my baby? Like, what is going to happen? How come you don't have the right answers here? Because all that was left to do basically was I had to walk out of there with my mom and leave my child behind on the counter, essentially, in the exam room. And I felt like a horrible mom, because who does that? It's like, what else could I do? What else could I reasonably do? It's like, well, what's tomorrow going to look like now? What am I going to tell my boys? How do you make these two little boys who are excited for a new sibling understand? There had been a chaplain, I believe, who'd come into the hospital while I was still miscarrying, who'd given me some information. And parent care, of course, was on there, and Patty's name. She assured me that she'd be able to look into finding my baby, and it was probably one of the best phone calls I ever made in my life. Thanks to Patty, we found our girl. We decided to name her Arya Jane. Being able to give her a name was very healing. The support that I've received from parent care has been incredible. Being able to learn about the grief process after this kind of loss was such a comfort. at our meetings, you can say whatever it is you need to feel and know that there's no judgment in the room. It helps to be able to move forward, not forget, and reconcile within yourself that, you know, I didn't do anything wrong, but I just needed time. It means a lot to know that there are people who love you and can see you at your worst and love you through it anyway. You can appreciate the person that you become after you walk through fire and they're still there. I would just have to say that if there's anything I've learned in this process is that grief and loss, it really is a journey. It's never done, but it gets easier. The care that I receive from Patty gives me hope that there are a lot of people out there who are there for support, are there for help, and are there to champion improvement in our system. It makes me happy that maybe part of my journey can help improve someone else's.